The howling wind slammed against the cabin walls like a vengeful spirit as Rebecca Forrest stared out the window, watching her husband Marshall ride away into the swirling white abyss of the Montana blizzard, his final words still ringing in her ears. "I ain't coming back this time." Rebecca pressed her palm against the frosted glass, her breath forming clouds that obscured the rapidly disappearing silhouette of the man she had married just 14 months prior. The year was 1878, and at 22 years old, Rebecca found herself alone in a merciless winter storm, abandoned by a husband who had promised her the world but delivered only heartache. "Marshall." She called out, though her voice couldn't possibly reach him through the howling storm and the closed door. The fire in the hearth was dying, and her cabin sat 5 miles from the nearest neighbor, 10 from the small mining town of Silver Creek. She knew staying meant certain death. The firewood would last perhaps another hour, and Marshall had taken all the provisions worth carrying. Rebecca's hand instinctively went to her stomach. The child growing inside her was barely showing, but it was there a secret she had planned to share with Marshall tonight. Perhaps if she had told him sooner, he wouldn't have left. Or perhaps he would have still abandoned them both. The temperature was dropping rapidly. Rebecca gathered what little she could her woolen shawl, a small knife Marshall had forgotten, and a locket containing a portrait of her parents back east in Boston. She had no horse. Marshall had taken their only mount. She had no food. The pantry was bare save for a half-empty sack of flour and some dried beans. She had only her determination and the desperate hope that she could reach town before the blizzard claimed her life. Rebecca stepped out onto the porch, the wind immediately slicing through her inadequate clothing. Her skirts whipped around her legs as she pulled the shawl tighter. The snow was already ankle-deep and falling fast. She couldn't see the path that led toward town, but she knew its general direction. East? She had to head east. Each step was a battle against the wind and the accumulating snow. Her boots, more fashionable than functional, a remnant from her life back east, quickly became sodden and heavy. The cold seeped into her bones and her fingers grew numb despite being tucked into her armpits for warmth. "You can do this," Rebecca whispered to herself, the words immediately torn away by the wind. "For the baby. You must do this for the baby." But after an hour of trudging through the blizzard, Rebecca's strength was failing. She had lost the path completely, and the landmarks she knew were obscured by the white veil of snow. Her lips had turned blue, and her movements were becoming sluggish. She stumbled and fell to her knees in a snowdrift. "Please," she prayed, though she wasn't sure if she was addressing God or simply the uncaring wilderness around her. "Please help us." As if in answer, the faint sound of hoofbeats reached her through the howling wind. Rebecca raised her head, squinting through the snow. A dark shape materialized, growing larger as it approached, a horse and rider moving carefully through the storm. "Hello," Rebecca called, her voice weak. She tried to stand but found her legs wouldn't cooperate. "Help me, please." The rider spotted her and changed course, guiding the horse directly toward her. As they drew closer, Rebecca could make out the figure of a man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the storm and a heavy duster coat that whipped around him. He reined in his horse beside her and dismounted in one fluid motion, boots crunching in the snow as he approached. Rebecca looked up at him, relief and wariness mingling in her heart. In these parts, not all strangers could be trusted. "Madam." His voice was deep but gentle as he crouched beside her. "What in tarnation are you doing out in this storm?" Rebecca tried to speak, but her teeth were chattering too violently. The man, the cowboy, she realized, noting his worn leather chaps and the distinct shape of his hat, didn't wait for an answer. He assessed her condition with a quick, experienced glance and made a decision. "You're half frozen," he said, already shrugging out of his heavy coat. "Here." Before Rebecca could protest, he wrapped the coat around her. It was warm from his body and smelled of leather, horses, and pine smoke. The sudden heat against her frozen skin was so intense it almost burned. "I'm Xavier Greene," he said, helping her to her feet. Ranch foreman at the Double Crown, 'bout 3 miles from here. Rebecca Forrest, she managed through chattering teeth. My husband left me, the cabin, no firewood, had to try. Xavier's expression darkened momentarily. Left you in this. He looked around at the intensifying storm, then back at Rebecca, seeming to notice for the first time the slight swell of her abdomen beneath her dress. His jaw tightened. Well, Mrs. Forrest, let's get you somewhere safe. He helped her onto his horse, a sturdy chestnut gelding that stood patiently in the storm. Rebecca was too weak to protest when Xavier climbed up behind her, one strong arm around her waist to keep her steady. Double Crown's closer than town, he said, his breath warm against her ear as he guided the horse forward. Owner's away, but the cook's there and another hand. We'll get you warm and see to it you're taken care of. Rebecca wanted to thank him, to explain further, but exhaustion and cold overtook her. She felt herself slipping into unconsciousness, her body slumping back against Xavier's solid chest. Stay with me, Mrs. Forrest, Xavier urged, tightening his hold on her. Talk to me. Where you from originally? You don't sound like you're from these parts. Boston, Rebecca mumbled, fighting to stay awake. Came west, last year, after my parents died. Boston, huh? Never been east of the Mississippi myself, Xavier said conversationally, keeping her engaged. Born in Texas, been moving north and west ever since. How'd you end up in this part of Montana? Marshall, my husband, wrote such beautiful letters, said he had a claim, a future. Rebecca's voice cracked. It was all lies. Xavier didn't respond immediately, guiding his horse carefully through a stand of pine trees. The thick branches provided some shelter from the worst of the storm, and Rebecca felt herself breathing a little easier. Men who make promises they don't intend to keep, Xavier finally said, his voice low and tight. They're lower than a snake's belly in my book. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the muffled hoofbeats in the snow and the persistent howl of the wind. Rebecca drifted in and out of awareness, the warmth of Xavier's coat and body the only things keeping her from surrendering completely to the cold. Eventually, yellow lights appeared through the curtain of snow windows glowing with lantern light. Rebecca blinked, trying to focus. A large ranch house emerged from the white, with a barn and several outbuildings nearby. Here we are, Xavier said, guiding the horse toward the barn. Double Crown Ranch. The barn door opened as they approached, and an older man stepped out, lantern held high. That you, Xavier? The man called. Was starting to worry. Got a situation, Hank, Xavier replied, drawing the horse to a stop. Lady was stranded in the storm, need to get her inside and warmed up quick. Hank hurried forward, eyes widening as he saw Rebecca. Lord Almighty, she's blue as a summer sky. Bring her to the house, Mabel's got stew on and the fire's roaring. Xavier dismounted first, then carefully lifted Rebecca down. She tried to stand, but her legs buckled immediately. Without hesitation, Xavier swept her into his arms. Take care of Rusty for me, he called to Hank, already striding toward the main house with Rebecca cradled against his chest. Through her haze, Rebecca was aware of entering a warm kitchen, of female hands helping to remove her wet clothing, of being wrapped in blankets and seated before a blazing hearth. A cup of something hot was pressed into her hands, and a stern-faced woman with kind eyes urged her to drink. Sip it slow now, child, the woman Mabel, Rebecca presumed, instructed. Too much heat too fast ain't good for the system. Rebecca obeyed, the rich broth warming her from the inside. Gradually, sensation returned to her extremities, bringing with it pain as her frozen flesh thawed. She winced, but didn't complain. Xavier appeared in the doorway, having seen to his own needs. He changed into dry clothes, a clean flannel shirt and denim trousers, and his dark hair was damp and combed back from his face. Without his hat and duster, Rebecca could see him properly for the first time. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 28 or 30, with a strong jawline softened by the concern in his deep-set eyes. How is she? He asked Mabel. She'll live, the cook replied matter-of-factly. No frostbite that I can see, just chilled to the bone, but she needs rest and plenty of it. Mabel glanced meaningfully at Rebecca's midsection. Both of them do. Xavier's expression remained carefully neutral, but Rebecca saw the muscle in his jaw tighten. I'll ride into town tomorrow, weather permitting. Let the sheriff know what happened. No, Rebecca protested, more forcefully than she intended. Both Mabel and Xavier turned to her in surprise. I mean, please don't. Marshall didn't. He didn't hurt me, not physically, he just left. Abandoning a woman in a blizzard seems like hurt to me, Xavier said quietly. Rebecca looked down at the cup in her hands. He didn't know about the baby. It wasn't a defense of Marshall, just a statement of fact. Mabel made a disapproving noise. That doesn't make it right, child. No, Rebecca agreed, her voice small. It doesn't. Xavier crossed the room and crouched beside her chair, bringing himself to eye level. Mrs. Forrest, Rebecca, she interrupted. Please, just Rebecca, he nodded. Rebecca, I won't do anything you don't want me to do, but I need to understand your situation better. Do you have family nearby, anyone who can help you? Rebecca shook her head. No one. My parents died of influenza last year. I have an aunt in Philadelphia, but we're not close. Marshall was. He was all I had. The silence that followed was heavy with the implications of her situation, a pregnant woman, alone in the frontier, with winter just beginning. Well, Mabel said finally, her practical nature asserting itself, we can worry about all that tomorrow. Tonight you need food and sleep. She turned to Xavier. The blue room's made up. Can you help her upstairs while I finish this stew? Xavier nodded and stood, offering Rebecca his hand. She took it, surprised by how gentle his calloused palm felt against hers. He helped her to her feet, steadying her when she swayed slightly. I can walk, she assured him, though her legs felt like water. I'm sure you can, Xavier replied with the ghost of a smile, but I'm going to help you anyway. He guided her through the ranch house, larger and more comfortably appointed than Rebecca had expected, to a small bedroom on the second floor. A 4-poster bed with a blue quilt dominated the space, and a fire crackled in a small fireplace. Mabel will bring you some food, Xavier said, releasing her arm once he was sure she was steady. And some of Mrs. Carlton's clothes might fit you. She's the owner's wife there in Denver for the winter. Thank you, Rebecca said, suddenly overwhelmed by the kindness of these strangers. Tears pricked at her eyes. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found me. Xavier's expression was solemn, but I did find you. That's what matters. He moved toward the door, then paused. We'll figure the rest out tomorrow. For now, just rest. After he left, Rebecca sank onto the edge of the bed, one hand resting protectively over her stomach. For the first time since watching Marshall ride away, she allowed herself to truly feel the terror, the abandonment, the uncertainty of her future. Tears flowed freely down her cheeks. But beneath the fear and grief, a tiny spark flickered to life, the realization that she was alive, that her baby was alive, and that for tonight at least they were safe and warm. We'll be all right, she whispered to her unborn child. Somehow we'll be all right. The blizzard raged for 3 days, imprisoning everyone at Double Crown Ranch. During that time, Rebecca gradually regained her strength, though her heart remained fractured by Marshall's abandonment. On the morning of the 4th day, she awoke to find sunlight streaming through the bedroom window. The storm had finally broken. She dressed in borrowed clothing, a simple blue dress that belonged to Mrs. Carlton, altered hastily by Mabel's capable hands to accommodate Rebecca's changing figure. When she descended to the kitchen, she found Xavier and Hank at the table, discussing ranch business over coffee. Both men rose when she entered, a courtesy that made Rebecca smile despite herself. Back east, such manners were expected. In the frontier, they were a rare comfort. Good morning, she said, feeling suddenly shy. The storm has passed, I see. Clear as a bell out there, Hank confirmed, though the snow's piled high as a man's shoulder in some drifts. I'll be riding into town today, Xavier added, watching her carefully. We need to restock some supplies, and I thought, well, we should talk about what you want to do next. Rebecca nodded, her momentary lightness fading. During the storm, it had been easy to postpone decisions about her future. Now reality pressed in once more. "I need to return to my cabin," she said. "There are things there, personal items, my parents' letters, things I couldn't carry when I left." Xavier and Hank exchanged glances. "I checked on your place yesterday," Xavier said gently. "Rode out to make sure it was still standing." "And?" Rebecca asked, a knot forming in her stomach. Roof collapsed under the snow weight. "I'm sorry, Rebecca." The news hit her like a physical blow. That cabin, humble as it was, had been her home, the only physical connection she had left to her life with Marshall. Was anything salvageable? She asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I didn't go inside, wasn't safe," Xavier explained. "But once things thaw a bit, we can see what might be recovered." Rebecca sank into a chair, her mind racing. She had no home, no possessions beyond the clothes she wore, and nowhere to go. The enormity of her situation threatened to overwhelm her. Mabel, who had been quietly working at the stove, turned around with a plate of biscuits and gravy. "Eat first," she said firmly, setting the food before Rebecca. "No good decisions come from an empty stomach." Rebecca obeyed automatically, the rich, savory gravy momentarily distracting her from her troubles. As she ate, Xavier and Hank resumed their conversation, discussing cattle counts and fence repairs in the quiet, measured tones of men who knew their business. Listening to them, Rebecca found herself envying their certainty, the clear purpose that guided their days. Her own life had once seemed so clearly defined: marry Marshall, build a life together in the West, start a family. Now all her plans were scattered like leaves in a windstorm. After breakfast, Xavier found her sitting on the covered porch, wrapped in a blanket despite the bright sunshine. The air was bitterly cold, but the sky was a brilliant, endless blue after the storm. "Planning to freeze again so soon?" he asked, though his tone was light. Rebecca managed a small smile. "I needed to breathe, think." Xavier nodded, leaning against the porch railing. "And what are your thoughts telling you?" "That I have very few options," she admitted. "I can't stay here indefinitely, imposing on your hospitality. I have no money to speak of. Marshall controlled our finances. I could try to find work in town, but—" She placed a hand on her stomach. "Few people hire expectant mothers." Xavier was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the snow-covered landscape. "There's another option," he finally said. "Stay here at Double Crown." Rebecca looked at him in surprise. "I don't understand." "Mrs. Carlton has been after Mr. Carlton to hire household help for years," Xavier explained. "She says the ranch is getting too big for just Mabel to manage the house alongside her cooking duties. You could take the position, light work, room and board for you and the baby when it comes. But Mr. Carlton isn't here to approve such an arrangement." Xavier's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "I have authority to make necessary decisions in his absence." "I'd say helping a stranded woman qualifies." Rebecca stared at him, searching for any sign of ulterior motive in his steady gaze. She found none. "Why would you do this for me? You don't know me." "I know enough," Xavier replied simply. "I know you're in trouble through no fault of your own. I know you're expecting a child who deserves a chance. And I know what it's like to be alone in this world." He straightened, as if uncomfortable with revealing even that small piece of himself. "Think it over. I'm riding to town now, but I'll be back by supper time." Rebecca watched him walk to the barn, his tall figure moving with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin. In just a few days, Xavier Greene had upended her understanding of men. Marshall had been charming and glib, full of grand promises and flowery words. Xavier was the opposite: quiet, straightforward, his kindness expressed through actions rather than declarations. By the time Xavier returned from town that evening, Rebecca had made her decision. She would accept his offer, at least until the baby was born. After that, she would reassess her situation. It wasn't ideal, but it was the most practical choice available to her. "There's one more thing," Xavier said after she told him her decision. They were alone in the ranch house study, a small room lined with bookshelves that served as an office. "I spoke to the sheriff while I was in town, told him about finding you in the storm." Rebecca tensed. "I asked you not to. I didn't give details," Xavier assured her quickly. "Just said I'd found a stranded traveler, but I did ask if anyone had seen Marshal Forrest. And he was in town 3 days ago. Sold your horse and wagon at Jenkins' livery for cash, then boarded the eastbound stage to Helena. Sheriff said he was talking about heading to California." Rebecca absorbed this information slowly. So Marshall truly had left for good, not in a moment of anger to be regretted later, but with calculated intent. He had abandoned her, taken what little they had of value, and fled. "I see," she said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the turmoil inside her. "Thank you for telling me." Xavier studied her for a moment. "You have a right to what he took, Rebecca. That horse and wagon were half yours. The sheriff could know," Rebecca interrupted. "Let him go. The man who sold our horse and left his pregnant wife to die in a blizzard, that's not the man I married. Or thought I married." She met Xavier's eyes directly. "I don't want anything from him anymore." Xavier nodded slowly, respect evident in his gaze. "All right then, we'll leave it be." That night, as Rebecca lay in bed listening to the occasional creak and settle of the unfamiliar house, she placed both hands on her stomach and made a silent promise to her child. They would build a new life, independent of Marshal Forrest and his broken promises. It wouldn't be the life she had envisioned when she left Boston, but it would be theirs, built on truth rather than illusion. And perhaps, she admitted to herself in the darkness, it would include the quiet cowboy whose coat had saved her life, and whose integrity was already beginning to heal something broken inside her. Winter settled into its stride across the Montana Territory, transforming the landscape into a realm of white and blue. At Double Crown Ranch, a routine emerged that gave structure to Rebecca's days. In the mornings, she helped Mabel with breakfast and household chores. Afternoons were devoted to mending, cleaning, and organizing the ranch records, a task Xavier had hesitantly entrusted to her, after discovering she had a head for numbers. "My father was an accountant," she explained when Xavier expressed surprise at how quickly she sorted through the ranch's disorganized ledgers. "He taught me his methods from the time I was old enough to add and subtract." "Well, you've just saved me hours of headaches," Xavier replied with a rare full smile that transformed his usually serious face. "Mr. Carlton's been after me to get these books in order for months." Rebecca found herself looking forward to these quiet afternoon sessions in the study. Sometimes Xavier would join her, discussing ranch business or simply sitting in companionable silence as he read through mail or agricultural journals. His presence was calming, steady, and reassuring in a way she had never experienced with Marshall, whose moods shifted like weather. As December progressed, Rebecca's pregnancy became more visible. Her borrowed dresses grew tight across her expanding middle, requiring further alterations by Mabel's expert hand. One evening, as the ranch cook worked on letting out a seam, she broke the comfortable silence between them. "That baby's growing strong," Mabel observed. "You feeling any kicks yet?" Rebecca nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "Just little flutters like butterfly wings, mostly at night when everything's quiet." Mabel nodded approvingly. "That's good. Active babies are healthy babies." She paused in her sewing, giving Rebecca a measured look. "You know, Xavier's been riding out to your old cabin whenever the weather permits, trying to salvage what he can." "He has." Rebecca was surprised. Xavier hadn't mentioned this to her. "Brought back some books, a wooden box with letters and a silver hairbrush last time. Has them hidden in the tack room until he can repair them proper. Wanted it to be a surprise for Christmas, I expect." Rebecca felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the hearth. "That's very kind of him." "Kind is what that man is through and through," Mabel said firmly, returning to her sewing. "Not that you'd know it from how little he speaks about himself." Rebecca had noticed this tendency in Xavier. his reluctance to discuss his past or personal matters. In the weeks she had lived at Double Crown, she had learned he was 31 years old, had grown up in Texas, fought briefly for the Confederacy as a very young man, something he mentioned with evident discomfort, and had worked ranches across the West before coming to Montana 5 years ago. Beyond these bare facts, Xavier remained something of a mystery. Has he always been so? Reserved? Rebecca asked carefully. Mabel's needle flashed in the firelight as she considered the question. Not always. When he first came to Double Crown, he was more open. Used to play the harmonica of an evening, even sang sometimes. Good voice, too. She tied off her thread and bit it with her teeth. Changed about 3 years back after what happened with Sarah Blackwell. Sarah Blackwell. Rebecca tried to keep her tone casual, though her curiosity was thoroughly piqued. Daughter of the banker in town. Pretty thing, all golden curls and dimples. She and Xavier were courting for nearly a year, serious courting, mind you. Everyone expected an announcement. What happened? Mabel's expression darkened. Her father happened. Old man Blackwell decided his daughter could do better than her ranch foreman, no matter how respected. Brought in some fancy lawyer from Helena, second cousin to the family with political ambitions, and suddenly, Sarah was engaged to him instead. That's terrible, Rebecca said, genuinely outraged on Xavier's behalf. Did she have no say in the matter? Oh, she had a say, Mabel replied grimly. She chose her father's money and the lawyer's prospects over Xavier's honest heart. Wrote him a letter rather than tell him to his face. He never spoke of it, not once, but he stopped playing that harmonica. Stopped singing, too. Rebecca absorbed this information slowly, pieces of Xavier's character falling into place like a puzzle being completed. His kindness toward her, a woman betrayed by the man who should have protected her, took on new depth in light of his own experience with heartbreak. Thank you for telling me, Rebecca said quietly. I won't mention it to him. Mabel nodded approvingly. Best not to. Man's pride is a delicate thing, even in one as solid as Xavier Greene. The conversation shifted to other topics, but Rebecca's thoughts remained on Xavier. That night, as she felt the gentle movements of her child beneath her palms, she found herself wondering what it might be like to build a life with a man whose actions matched his words, a man like Xavier. The thought both comforted and terrified her. Christmas arrived with a fresh blanket of snow and temperatures cold enough to freeze breath in the air. Inside Double Crown Ranch, however, warmth and good cheer prevailed. Mabel outdid herself preparing a feast, and even Hank, usually gruff and taciturn, contributed to the festivities by producing a small fiddle and playing traditional carols after dinner. Rebecca, wearing a new dress that Mabel had secretly sewn for her from fabric Xavier had brought from town, found herself genuinely enjoying the holiday for the first time since her parents' death. The baby seemed to share her happiness, moving actively as she sat by the fire listening to Hank's music. Someone's celebrating in there, Xavier commented quietly, taking a seat beside her. He had noticed her hand resting on her stomach. Rebecca smiled. I think he or she approves of Hank's playing. Hard not to, Xavier replied, watching the older man coax a surprisingly delicate rendition of Silent Night from his instrument. Hank doesn't bring that fiddle out often, but when he does, it's something to hear. They sat in comfortable silence until the song ended. Then Xavier cleared his throat softly. I have something for you, he said, reaching into his vest pocket. For Christmas. Rebecca looked at him in surprise. You didn't need to, I wanted to, Xavier interrupted gently. He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with a simple string. It's not much, but... Rebecca unwrapped the gift carefully. Inside was her mother's silver locket, the one she had carried with her when she fled the cabin. It had been dented and tarnished when last she saw it, but now it gleamed in the firelight, carefully polished and restored. The hinge that had been broken was repaired, and when she opened it, the portraits of her parents smiled up at her. How did you? She whispered, tears pricking at her eyes. Found it in what was left of the cabin, Xavier explained. Took it to the silversmith in town to fix the hinge, polished it myself. Rebecca closed her fingers around the locket, deeply moved by the thoughtfulness of the gift. Thank you. This means more than I can say. There's more, Xavier said, seeming almost shy, in the barn, if you're up to walking out there. Curious, Rebecca nodded. Xavier helped her into her coat, technically his coat, the same one he had wrapped around her that first night, which she had continued to use during her stay, and they stepped out into the crisp night air. The barn was warm with the body heat of horses and livestock. Xavier led Rebecca past the stalls to a small room at the back that served as a workshop. There, illuminated by a hanging lantern, stood a beautifully crafted wooden cradle. Rebecca gasped softly, approaching it with tentative steps. The cradle was made of polished pine, its edges smooth and rounded. Small carved stars decorated the headboard, and it rocked gently when she touched it. Xavier. She breathed, unable to find adequate words. Every baby needs a proper place to sleep, he said simply. I had some time in the evenings, and Hank helped with the rockers. Rebecca ran her fingers over the smooth wood, marveling at the craftsmanship and the hours of work the cradle represented. No one, not even Marshall during their brief courtship, had ever created something so personal, so meaningful for her. It's beautiful, she said finally, looking up to find Xavier watching her with an intensity that made her heart quicken. Truly beautiful. Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing steadily since the night he found her in the storm. Rebecca saw it in Xavier's eyes, felt it in the charged silence between them. Then the baby kicked, a strong movement that made Rebecca place her hand on her stomach in surprise. Without thinking, she reached for Xavier's hand and placed it where the child was moving. Xavier's eyes widened as he felt the distinct push against his palm. A smile unlike any Rebecca had seen from him before spread across his face, open, wondering, almost boyish in its delight. That's quite a kick, he said, his voice husky with emotion. Strong like its mother. Rebecca's breath caught at the tenderness in his expression. For a moment, they stood together in the lantern light, connected by the movement of new life beneath their joined hands. The spell was broken by the sound of the barn door opening and Hank's voice calling out, Xavier. Rebecca, Mabel's serving her special eggnog. Xavier reluctantly withdrew his hand. We should head back, he said, though he made no move to leave. Rebecca nodded, equally reluctant to end the moment. Yes, we should. As they walked back toward the house, snow crunching beneath their boots and stars brilliant overhead, Rebecca felt a certainty settle over her. Whatever happened next, her life and her child's life were intertwined with Xavier Greene's in a way that transcended gratitude or circumstance. The question was whether Xavier felt the same certainty, and whether either of them was ready to acknowledge it. January brought the harshest weeks of winter, with temperatures dropping so low that the ranch's activities contracted to the essential business of survival. Even brief exposure to the elements could be dangerous, so Xavier and Hank worked in shifts to care for the livestock, neither staying outside longer than absolutely necessary. Inside the house, Rebecca found her energy diminishing as her pregnancy advanced. Simple tasks that had once been easy now left her breathless and fatigued. Mabel noticed and quietly redistributed the household duties, assigning Rebecca lighter work despite her protests. Pregnancy ain't a sickness, the older woman said firmly when Rebecca apologized for her limitations, but it is hard work growing a human being. You rest when you need to rest. One particularly bitter afternoon, as wind howled around the eaves and snow pattered against the windows, Rebecca sat in the study organizing supply invoices. The fire had burned low, and she was about to add another log when she felt a sharp pain across her abdomen. She gasped, bracing herself against the desk as the sensation intensified, then gradually subsided. Rebecca took a deep breath, pressing a hand to her swollen belly. The baby moved reassuringly, but something felt different. Wrong. When a second pain gripped her 15 minutes later, Rebecca knew with certainty that something was amiss. The baby wasn't due for at least another month. She made her way carefully to the kitchen, where Mabel was preparing bread dough for the next day's baking. "Mabel," Rebecca said, her voice steadier than she felt, "I think something's happening with the baby." Mabel looked up sharply, her experienced eyes quickly assessing Rebecca's pale face and the way she cradled her stomach. "What kind of pain is it? Sharp, dull, coming and going?" "Sharp like a band tightening," Rebecca explained. "It's happened twice now, about 15 minutes apart." The cook wiped her hands on her apron, her expression grave. "Let's get you lying down. Could be false labor, or it could be the real thing coming early." "It's too soon," Rebecca whispered, fear creeping into her voice. "Babies come when they come," Mabel replied matter-of-factly, though her concern was evident in the gentle way she guided Rebecca toward the stairs. "Let's not borrow trouble until we know what we're dealing with." The next few hours were a blur of waiting and uncertainty. The pains continued, growing neither more frequent nor more intense, but refusing to subside completely. Mabel examined Rebecca as best she could with her limited medical knowledge, finally shaking her head in frustrated uncertainty. "We need the doctor," she declared as evening approached. "This ain't right, but I can't tell exactly what's wrong." "The doctor's in town," Rebecca reminded her, trying to control her growing fear. "No one can make that ride in this weather." As if to emphasize her point, the wind shrieked around the house, rattling the windows in their frames. Travel in such conditions would be suicidal. "Xavier might," Mabel said quietly. "For you." Before Rebecca could protest, they heard the back door open downstairs, followed by the stomping of boots as Xavier and Hank returned from the barn. Mabel immediately went to find them, leaving Rebecca alone with her worry. Minutes later, Xavier appeared in the doorway, still wearing his heavy coat, his face red from the cold. Concern etched deep lines around his eyes as he approached the bed where Rebecca lay. "Mabel says you're having pains," he said without preamble. "Early labor." Rebecca nodded, another wave of discomfort washing over her. "Maybe, but it feels wrong somehow." Xavier's jaw tightened. "The doctor can't come in this storm," Rebecca finished for him. "It's too dangerous, Xavier. We'll have to wait it out." But Xavier was already shaking his head. "Doc Sanders has delivered half the babies in this county, including during worse weather than this. If he says you and the child are fine, then we'll all rest easier. If not—" He didn't complete the thought. "I'm going." "Xavier, no," Rebecca struggled to sit up. "Please, I can't bear it if something happened to you because of me." He came to the bedside, kneeling so they were at eye level. "Rebecca," he said softly, "I found you in a blizzard once. I can navigate a winter storm to Silver Creek." He took her hand, his calloused palm warm against her skin. "Trust me to come back." The intensity in his gaze made arguing impossible. Rebecca squeezed his hand, her heart constricting with emotions too complex to name. "I do trust you," she whispered. I couldn't bear losing you." Something flickered in Xavier's eyes, recognition, perhaps, of the deeper meaning beneath her words. "You won't lose me," he promised, his voice low and certain. "I'll be back with the doctor before you know it." He stood, adjusting his coat and checking that his scarf was secure. "Mabel will stay with you. Hank knows what to do if—" He paused. "If anything changes before I return." Rebecca watched him go, fear and hope warring in her chest. As the door closed behind him, she closed her eyes and did something she hadn't done in months. She prayed, fervently and without reservation, for the safety of Xavier Greene and the life of her unborn child. The hours that followed were the longest of Rebecca's life. The pains continued their irregular pattern, neither intensifying into true labor nor subsiding entirely. Mabel stayed by her side, alternately offering comfort and practical advice, while Hank paced the floor below, occasionally checking on them with gruff concern. Outside, the storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, it seemed to intensify as night fell, the wind's howl becoming a continuous roar that made conversation difficult even indoors. Rebecca tried not to imagine Xavier out in that maelstrom, tried not to picture him lost or injured, but her mind conjured the images regardless. "He'll make it," Mabel assured her, correctly reading her thoughts. "That man's got more sense than to take foolish risks, and he knows this territory better than most born here." Rebecca nodded, though her worry remained. How long should it take to reach town and return with the doctor, Mabel considered. In good weather, 2 hours round trip. In this, could be 4, maybe 6 if they have to stop for shelter. 6 hours. Rebecca glanced at the small clock on the bedside table. Xavier had been gone just over 2. The prospect of 4 more hours of uncertainty seemed unbearable. As if sensing her distress, the baby moved within her, a rolling motion that momentarily distracted Rebecca from her worry. She placed her hand on the spot, feeling the distinct shape of what might be a foot or elbow pressing outward. "Still active, that's good," Mabel commented. "Means the little one's holding up fine, whatever's happening." Rebecca took comfort in this observation, focusing on the movements of her child rather than the storm or the passing time. Eventually, exhausted by pain and worry, she drifted into a fitful sleep. She awakened to a commotion downstairs, the sound of the door opening, voices calling, boots on the wooden floor. Rebecca struggled to sit up, hope surging through her veins. "They're back," Mabel confirmed, already moving toward the door. "I'll bring them right up." Moments later, a small, wiry man with a salt and pepper beard entered the room, followed by Xavier. The doctor looked tired but alert, shaking snow from his coat as he approached the bed. Xavier remained in the doorway, his face pale beneath wind-burned cheeks, snow still melting in his dark hair. "Mrs. Forrest, I'm Dr. Sanders," the physician introduced himself, already opening his medical bag. "Quite a night for a house call, eh? Now, let's see what's troubling you and your little passenger." Rebecca submitted to his examination, answering his questions about the pain and her pregnancy while trying not to fixate on Xavier's presence. The cowboy didn't speak, but his eyes never left her face, conveying without words his relief at having successfully completed his mission. "Finally, doctor." Sanders straightened, a reassuring smile spreading beneath his beard. "Good news, Mrs. Forrest. You're not in labor, premature or otherwise. What you're experiencing is something we call false labor pains, combined with some ligament stretching that's normal as the baby grows." Relief flooded through Rebecca. "The baby's all right. Seems perfectly healthy from what I can tell. Good strong heartbeat, proper position. I'd still advise rest for the next few days, but I see no reason to expect an early arrival." Xavier visibly relaxed against the doorframe, the tension draining from his shoulders. "That's good," he said, his voice rough with fatigue. "That's real good news, doctor." Sanders packed his instruments, providing instructions to Mabel about symptoms to watch for and remedies for Rebecca's discomfort. "I'll stay the night, if that's acceptable," he added. "No sense risking that journey again until daylight, and I could use a hot meal and a few hours' sleep." "Of course," Xavier agreed immediately. "We're grateful you came at all in this weather." After the doctor and Mabel left to arrange accommodations, Rebecca found herself alone with Xavier for the first time since his return. He approached the bed slowly, as if uncertain of his welcome. "You made it," Rebecca said softly, reaching for his hand. "I was so worried." Xavier's fingers closed around hers. "Told you I'd come back. How bad was it out there? Bad enough." He glanced toward the window where snow still pelted the glass. "But Doc Sanders didn't hesitate once I explained the situation. Good man." Rebecca studied Xavier's face, noting the new lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the wind-chapped skin of his cheeks. He had risked his life without question for her and her unborn child, a child that wasn't his, born of a marriage that had failed her. "Why did you do it?" she asked quietly. "Risk yourself like that?" Xavier met her gaze directly, something resolute in his expression. "Do you really need to ask?" The simple question hung between them, laden with unspoken meaning. Rebecca felt her heart accelerate, not with fear this time, but with a different kind of anticipation. "Perhaps I do," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Perhaps I need to hear it." Xavier took a deep breath, his grip on her hand tightening slightly. "Because you matter to me, Rebecca. You and your child." He paused, seeming to gather courage. "Because in these past months you've become important to me, more important than I expected, more important than might be wise." Rebecca felt tears gathering in her eyes, but they were tears of an entirely different nature than those she had shed earlier. "Is it unwise, then," she asked, "to care for someone who came to you broken and pregnant with another man's child?" "Some might say so," Xavier admitted. "But I've never been known for my wisdom when it comes to matters of the heart." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Only my stubbornness." Rebecca returned his smile through her tears. "I'm glad for that stubbornness. It saved my life, twice now." Xavier's expression grew serious again. "Rebecca, I don't want to pressure you. Your situation is complicated enough without Xavier," she interrupted gently. "My heart isn't as broken as I thought, or perhaps it's healing faster than I expected." She looked down at their joined hands. "Because of you." The admission hung between them, fragile and powerful. Xavier remained still for a long moment. Then slowly, giving her every opportunity to withdraw, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to her forehead in a gesture of such tender reverence that Rebecca felt her heart might burst. "Rest now," he murmured against her skin. "We have time to figure out the rest." As he straightened and moved toward the door, Rebecca called after him softly. "Xavier," he turned. "Yes, thank you, not just for tonight, but for everything, for finding me in that first storm. For giving me a place here, for the cradle." She paused, her hand resting on her stomach. "For caring about us." Xavier nodded once, his eyes conveying what words could not. Then he was gone, closing the door quietly behind him. Rebecca settled back against her pillows, her body exhausted but her mind strangely at peace. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside Double Crown Ranch, inside her heart, she had found unexpected shelter. February brought a gradual thaw, with days of brilliant sunshine interspersed among lingering winter storms. As the snow receded, Rebecca's pregnancy advanced, her body growing heavier and more ungainly with each passing week. Dr. Sanders, making good on his promise to check on her regularly, pronounced her healthy and predicted an early March delivery. "First babies often come late," he cautioned during his latest visit, "but you're carrying low, which suggests this little one might be punctual." Rebecca tried to use the remaining time to prepare both practically and emotionally for motherhood. Mabel, who had raised 5 children of her own before being widowed, became an invaluable source of advice, sharing wisdom on everything from swaddling techniques to home remedies for colic. Xavier, meanwhile, had been uncharacteristically busy, often leaving the ranch for days at a time on mysterious errands that he explained only vaguely as business for Mr. Carlton. Rebecca missed his steady presence, but understood that the ranch's operations couldn't pause for her personal situation. Still, something had definitely shifted between them since the night of the false labor. There was a new awareness in their interactions, a careful tenderness that acknowledged the feelings developing between them without pushing for definition or commitment. It was as if they had wordlessly agreed to wait until after the baby came, until Rebecca's future was clearer, until the time was right. One unseasonably warm afternoon, Rebecca sat on the porch, enjoying the rare opportunity to be outdoors without multiple layers of clothing. Her sewing basket rested beside her, but she had set aside her work in favor of simply basking in the sunshine, her face tilted toward its warmth like a flower seeking light. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her attention. Shading her eyes, she recognized Xavier returning from town, riding alongside a wagon driven by a stranger, an older gentleman with a neat white beard and spectacles. Curious, Rebecca struggled to her feet just as Xavier dismounted and hurried toward the porch. "You shouldn't be up," he chided gently, though his eyes were bright with some suppressed excitement. "Doc Sanders said rest, remember? I've been resting all morning," Rebecca countered, smiling despite herself at his concern. Besides, I couldn't resist the sunshine. She nodded toward the wagon which had stopped in the yard. "Who's your companion?" Judge Wilson, Xavier replied. "From Helena, he's here on official business." "Official business," Rebecca echoed, confused. "At Double Crown." Xavier nodded, suddenly seeming almost nervous, an unusual state for him. Partly ranch business for Mr. Carlton, but also, he hesitated, also something personal, for you. Before Rebecca could question him further, the judge approached, removing his hat respectfully. "Mrs. Forrest, I presume, an honor to meet you, madam. Xavier has told me much about your situation." Rebecca glanced between the two men, increasingly bewildered. "I'm afraid I don't understand what's happening." Xavier took a deep breath. "I've been working to locate Marshall," he explained. "With the judge's help, we found him in San Francisco. He's agreed to sign divorce papers." Rebecca stared at him, speechless. Divorce was scandalous, difficult to obtain, and often left women in precarious social positions. Yet Xavier had arranged it all without consulting her, bringing a judge all the way from Helena. "I know I should have discussed it with you first," Xavier continued quickly, correctly reading her expression. "But I didn't want to raise your hopes if it couldn't be arranged. Marshall's made quite a reputation for himself in California, not a good one, and was willing to sign the papers to avoid any legal entanglements back here. What my young friend is too modest to explain," Judge Wilson interjected kindly, "is that he's gone to considerable trouble and expense to ensure this matter could be resolved quickly and with minimal difficulty for you, Mrs. Forrest. Not many would do so much." Rebecca felt overwhelmed, uncertain whether to be grateful for Xavier's initiative or upset that such important decisions about her life had been made without her input. "I need a moment," she said quietly. "Please excuse me." She retreated into the house, making her way to the study, the room that had become her sanctuary over the past months. There, she sank into the comfortable chair behind the desk, her hands automatically cradling her swollen abdomen. She had never seriously considered divorce. In Boston, it would have been unthinkable, a permanent stain on her reputation that would have followed her and her child for life. But here, in the frontier where life operated by different rules, perhaps it was possible to start truly anew. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Rebecca," Xavier's voice was hesitant. "May I come in?" "Yes," she replied after a moment. Xavier entered, closing the door behind him. "I'm sorry," he said immediately. "I should have spoken to you before bringing Judge Wilson here. If you're not ready for this, or if you don't want a divorce at all, I'll send him back to Helena with my apologies." Rebecca studied Xavier's face, seeing nothing but sincere concern for her well-being. "Why did you do it?" she asked. "Arrange all this?" Xavier approached slowly, as if giving her space to withdraw if she wished. "Because I wanted you to be free," he said simply. "Free to make your own choices about your future and your child's future, without Marshall Forrest's shadow hanging over you." "And what choices did you imagine I might make once free?" Rebecca pressed, needing to understand his motives completely. Xavier's gaze was steady, though a flush crept up his neck. "That's not for me to presume," he replied, "but I hoped you might consider staying here. At Double Crown," he paused. "With me." The directness of his statement took Rebecca's breath away. "Xavier, I'm not asking for any promises right now," he added quickly. "I know your child must be your first priority, and rightly so. I know you need time to heal from what Marshall did. But I wanted you to know that if you choose to stay, if you ever feel ready to consider a future together." He trailed off, running a hand through his dark hair in a rare gesture of uncertainty. Rebecca felt tears gathering in her eyes, overwhelmed by the realization of how much thought and care Xavier had put into creating possibilities for her. "You arranged a divorce for me without even knowing if I'd consider staying with you." "Yes," Xavier admitted. "Your freedom was worth securing regardless of what you decide to do with it." In that moment, the last of Rebecca's doubts about Xavier Greene dissolved. This was a man who thought of her needs before his own, who had gone to extraordinary lengths to give her choices rather than making demands. The contrast with Marshall couldn't have been starker. "The divorce papers," she said softly. "Are they ready to be signed?" Xavier nodded. "Judge Wilson has them. He can witness your signature and make everything legal before he returns to Helena tomorrow." Rebecca took a deep breath, her decision crystallizing. "Then I'd like to sign them, today." "You're certain you don't need more time to consider?" "I've never been more certain of anything," Rebecca replied, surprised to find it was true. "Marshall abandoned us, me and his child. He forfeited any right to be my husband the moment he rode away into that blizzard." Relief washed over Xavier's features. "I'll tell the judge," he said, turning toward the door. "Xavier," Rebecca called after him. He paused, looking back. "After the papers are signed, we should talk about that future you mentioned." A slow smile spread across Xavier's face, transforming his serious features. "Yes, madam," he agreed softly. "I'd like that very much." The signing of the divorce papers took place in the Double Crown study that afternoon, a brief, businesslike procedure that belied its emotional significance. Judge Wilson explained each document carefully, ensuring Rebecca understood exactly what she was agreeing to. "Under the circumstances of abandonment, you're entitled to retain your maiden name if you wish," the judge explained. "Or continue using Forrest, of course." Rebecca thought for a moment. "I'd like to be Rebecca Frost again," she decided, the name of her childhood feeling right on her tongue. "A fresh start." The judge nodded approvingly. "Very well, Miss Frost it is." When the last page was signed and the judge had affixed his seal, Rebecca felt a profound sense of both closure and possibility. One chapter of her life was definitively ended, another was free to begin. That evening, after Judge Wilson had been settled in the guest room and the household had retired for the night, Rebecca found Xavier on the porch. He stood leaning against the railing, gazing at the stars that sparkled in the clear night sky. "May I join you?" she asked softly. Xavier turned, his expression warming at the sight of her. "Always." Rebecca moved to stand beside him, her shoulder just touching his. For several minutes they simply stood together in comfortable silence, absorbing the peace of the night. "I've been thinking about what happens next," Rebecca finally said. "About my future, our future, if that's still what you want." "It is," Xavier confirmed without hesitation, "but there's something you should know first." He turned to face her fully. "I've been keeping something from you, not intentionally, but by omission." Rebecca felt a flicker of apprehension. "What is it?" "Double Crown isn't just where I work," Xavier said quietly. "It's mine. I'm Xavier Greene Carlton. This ranch has belonged to my family for 2 generations." Rebecca stared at him, trying to absorb this revelation. "You're the owner, but you said everyone calls you the foreman." "Because that's how I introduce myself," Xavier explained. "After what happened with Sarah, I wanted to be sure that anyone who showed interest in me did so for myself, not for what I own." He looked away, a hint of old pain in his expression. "It became a habit, I suppose, so all this time, I've been myself," Xavier assured her quickly. "Just not the full story of myself. I still do all the work of a foreman, I always have, even when my father was alive. I believe in earning my place, not just inheriting it." Rebecca took a moment to process this information, understanding why Xavier might have been reluctant to reveal his true status after his experience with Sarah Blackwell. "So when you offered me a position as household help," a slight flush colored Xavier's cheeks, "I wanted to give you a reason to stay that preserved your dignity. I knew you wouldn't accept charity." "And Mr. and Mrs. Carlton, who are in Denver for the winter, my aunt and uncle," Xavier admitted. "They visit occasionally but live primarily in Denver. I let people assume they're the owners to maintain my privacy." Rebecca shook her head, not in disapproval but in wonder at the complexity of the man before her. "You're a surprising man, Xavier Greene Carlton." "I hope not disappointingly so," he replied, watching her carefully for any sign of anger at his deception. "No," Rebecca assured him, reaching for his hand. "Not disappointingly at all." Relief washed over Xavier's features. Then may I speak plainly now, with everything in the open between us? Rebecca nodded, her heart beginning to race. Xavier took both her hands in his expression more open and vulnerable than she had ever seen it. "Rebecca Frost, I've come to love you," he said simply. "Your strength, your kindness, your determination. I've come to love the child you carry, too, though it isn't mine by blood. I want to offer you both a home here, not as an employee or a charity case, but as my wife, if you'll have me." Tears filled Rebecca's eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "I love you too," she whispered, the words feeling both momentous and entirely natural. "I think I've been falling in love with you since the night you found me in the blizzard." Xavier's smile was radiant as he drew her carefully into his arms, mindful of her advanced pregnancy. "Is that a yes?" He murmured against her hair. "It's a yes," Rebecca confirmed, lifting her face to his. "But are you certain, taking on another man's child?" "That child is part of you," Xavier said firmly. "That's all that matters to me. I'll love him or her as my own, Rebecca, I swear it." Their lips met in a kiss that was gentle yet profound, sealing promises that needed no further words. When they finally drew apart, Rebecca felt as though something fundamental had shifted within her, as if the pieces of her broken heart had not merely healed, but been reformed into something stronger and more beautiful than before. "When?" she asked softly. "When would you want to marry?" "As soon as you're ready," Xavier replied. "Judge Wilson could perform the ceremony before he leaves tomorrow, or we could wait until after the baby comes if you prefer." Rebecca considered for a moment. "After," she decided. "I want to meet our child first, to feel whole and strong when I become your wife." Xavier nodded, understanding without need for explanation. "After it is." He placed a gentle hand on her rounded abdomen. "Not too long to wait now." As if in agreement, the baby kicked against his palm, drawing laughter from them both. "I think that's a vote of approval," Rebecca said, covering Xavier's hand with her own. Above them, the vast Montana sky spread like a canopy of diamonds, witnessing their joy as it had once witnessed their first meeting in the midst of a blizzard. From that night of desperate survival to this moment of profound promise, their journey had been unexpected but undeniable. And as Xavier drew Rebecca close once more, she knew with absolute certainty that the storm that had nearly taken her life had instead delivered her exactly where she was meant to be. The first contractions began just before dawn on a crisp, early March morning. Rebecca awakened to a deep, insistent ache that wrapped around her lower back and radiated forward. She lay still for several moments, breathing through the sensation, mentally comparing it to the false labor pains she had experienced weeks earlier. This was different. This was real. She rose carefully, lighting the small lamp beside her bed. Dawn was just beginning to lighten the eastern sky, and the ranch would soon be stirring to life. Rebecca dressed slowly, pausing occasionally as contractions came and went. They were still far apart, 20 minutes or more between each one, which meant she had time to prepare. By the time she made her way downstairs, Mabel was already in the kitchen, stoking the fire in the cookstove. The older woman took one look at Rebecca's face and nodded knowingly. "Today's the day, is it?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "I think so," Rebecca confirmed, accepting the chair Mabel pulled out for her. "It's just beginning, though, no need to rush." "First babies take their time," Mabel agreed, already moving efficiently around the kitchen, gathering supplies they had prepared weeks ago. "Should I send Hank for the doctor now or wait a bit?" Rebecca considered, breathing through another contraction. "Wait until Xavier's had breakfast," she decided. "No sense in disrupting everyone's morning too soon." Mabel chuckled. "Practical as always, but I suspect a certain ranch owner might disagree about priorities this particular morning." As if summoned by their conversation, Xavier appeared in the doorway, his hair still damp from washing, his expression instantly alert as he took in the scene before him. "Rebecca, is it time?" The concern and excitement in his voice made Rebecca smile despite her discomfort. Early stages, she assured him. The baby won't arrive for hours yet. Xavier crossed to her side immediately, crouching beside her chair. How are you feeling? Do you need anything? Should I get the doctor? I'm fine, Rebecca said, touching his cheek gently. Truly. Have your breakfast, then perhaps Hank could ride for Dr. Sanders. There's no rush yet. Xavier looked like he might protest, but Mabel intervened. She's right, Xavier. First babies rarely rush into the world. You've got time for coffee at least. Reluctantly, Xavier agreed, though he kept glancing at Rebecca throughout the meal, as if expecting her to suddenly need immediate assistance. His concern was touching, if somewhat amusing to the two women who understood the typically slow progression of labor. By mid-morning, however, the situation had changed. Rebecca's contractions had increased in both frequency and intensity, coming every 10 minutes and lasting longer each time. Xavier had dispatched Hank to fetch the doctor and had personally prepared the bedroom according to Mabel's instructions. Fresh linens, plenty of clean towels, basins of water both cool and warm. Now Rebecca paced the upstairs hallway, finding movement easier than sitting still during contractions. Xavier walked with her, offering his arm for support when needed, his solid presence a comfort in the face of the increasingly demanding work her body was undertaking. Tell me about the spring calving, she requested between contractions, needing distraction. How many do you expect this year? Xavier looked surprised at the question but obliged, describing the anticipated additions to the herd and his plans for expanding the ranch's breeding program. His deep voice, discussing these familiar, practical matters, helped ground Rebecca as her body continued its ancient process. By early afternoon, Dr. Sanders had arrived and pronounced everything progressing normally. The baby's in perfect position, he assured them after examining Rebecca. Now it's just a matter of patience. Patience, however, became increasingly difficult as the hours passed and the contractions intensified. By late afternoon, Rebecca had retreated to the bedroom, the demands of labor requiring all her concentration and strength. Mabel stayed with her constantly, providing practical support and encouragement, while Xavier alternated between pacing outside the door and sitting quietly beside Rebecca, holding her hand through the worst contractions. You don't have to stay, Rebecca told him during a brief respite, aware that men traditionally kept their distance during childbirth. This could go on for hours yet. Xavier shook his head firmly. I'm not leaving unless you want me to, he replied. This child may not be mine by blood, but I intend to be present from the very beginning. His determination gave Rebecca fresh strength as the labor entered its most demanding phase. The sun set, and lamps were lit as the work of bringing new life into the world continued. Rebecca lost track of time, focusing only on each breath, each push, each moment of progress. Finally, as the clock downstairs struck midnight, marking the transition to a new day, a different cry filled the room, the lusty, indignant wail of a newborn taking its first breath. A girl, doctor. Sanders announced, lifting the squirming, slippery infant for Rebecca to see. A beautiful, healthy girl, tears streamed down Rebecca's face as the doctor placed her daughter on her chest. The baby was red-faced and wrinkled, with a surprising amount of dark hair plastered to her tiny head. She was, without question, the most perfect thing Rebecca had ever seen. Hello, little one, she whispered, gently touching the baby's cheek. I've been waiting so long to meet you. Xavier stood beside the bed, his own eyes suspiciously bright as he gazed down at mother and child. When Rebecca looked up at him, the love and wonder in his expression took her breath away. Would you like to hold your daughter? She asked softly. Xavier blinked in surprise. My. If you meant what you said about loving her as your own, Rebecca clarified, then she's as much yours as mine. With reverent care, Xavier accepted the swaddled infant from Rebecca, cradling her tiny body in his large, capable hands. The baby quieted almost immediately, as if sensing she was safe in his arms. She needs a name, he said, his voice husky with emotion. Rebecca had been considering names for months, but in this moment, only one seemed right. Hope, she suggested. Hope Greene Frost. She met Xavier's gaze. At least until she becomes Hope Greene Carlton, if that's all right with you. Xavier's smile was radiant. It's perfect, he agreed, gently rocking the newly named infant. Welcome to the world, Hope. As the room was put to rights around them and the first light of dawn began to creep through the windows, Rebecca watched Xavier with their daughter. He spoke to the baby in soft tones, promising her horses to ride, stars to count, and a family who would always love her. In that peaceful moment, Rebecca felt the last lingering shadows of her past life with Marshall finally dissipate. The blizzard that had nearly claimed her life had instead delivered her to this new beginning, to Xavier, to hope, to a love she had never imagined possible. Spring came early to Montana that year, bringing warm breezes and wildflowers to the hills surrounding Double Crown Ranch. By mid-April, the last traces of winter had vanished, replaced by vibrant green grass and the cheerful sounds of new life, calves bawling, birds nesting, and the occasional delighted coo of 6-week-old Hope as she discovered the world around her. The wedding was set for the last Saturday in April, a date chosen to coincide with the completion of the new house Xavier had been secretly building on the property, a wedding gift for his bride. The structure stood a quarter-mile from the main ranch house, offering privacy while remaining close to the heart of the ranch operations. It's not finished inside, Xavier had explained when he first showed it to Rebecca, Hope cradled in her arms. I wanted you to decide how it should look, what colors, what furniture, but the structure is sound and it can be ready by our wedding day if you like it. Like it? Rebecca had fallen instantly in love with the thoughtfully designed home, with its wide porch overlooking the valley, large windows to capture the mountain views, and special features. Xavier had incorporated with her in mind a spacious kitchen with ample storage, a sunny nursery adjoining the master bedroom, and a dedicated study where she could continue managing the ranch books she had come to enjoy working on. On the morning of her wedding day, Rebecca stood in that nearly completed home, gazing out the bedroom window at the preparations taking place in the meadow below. A simple arbor had been constructed, decorated with early spring blooms and ribbons. Chairs were arranged in neat rows, and tables for the celebration afterward stood ready under the spreading branches of cottonwood trees. Nervous? Mabel asked, entering with Hope in her arms. The baby was dressed in a delicate white gown that Mabel had sewn from one of Rebecca's old petticoats, tiny wildflowers woven into a crown for her dark curls. Not nervous, Rebecca replied truthfully, accepting her daughter from the older woman. Just reflective, I suppose. Mabel nodded understandingly. Natural to think about the journey on a day like this. You've come a long way from that stormy night. Indeed she had. From a desperate woman abandoned in a blizzard to a mother, soon-to-be wife, and active partner in one of the territory's most prosperous ranches. The transformation seemed almost unbelievable when considered in its entirety. Xavier asked me to give you this, Mabel said, placing a small wrapped package on the dressing table. Said you should open it before the ceremony. After Mabel left to continue with the preparations, Rebecca settled Hope in the cradle Xavier had made, now adorned with a soft blue blanket embroidered with the baby's name, and carefully opened the package. Inside was a leather-bound journal and a folded note in Xavier's distinctive handwriting. Rebecca, on this day that begins our official life together, I wanted to give you something that acknowledges the journey that brought us here. This journal is for our family's story, starting with how a blizzard and a borrowed coat led to the greatest happiness I could imagine. Perhaps someday Hope will read it and understand how love can be found in the most unexpected circumstances. I'll be waiting for you under the arbor, ready to begin the next chapter. All my love. Xavier. Tears blurred Rebecca's vision as she opened the journal to find the first page already contained an entry, a precise account of the night Xavier had found her in the blizzard, written in his careful hand. The final lines read, "I didn't know it then, but wrapping my coat around a stranger in a snowstorm would be the most important action of my life." Rebecca wiped her eyes, smiling at the sentiment so characteristic of Xavier, straightforward yet profound in its simplicity. She picked up the pen that had accompanied the journal and added her own words beneath his. "And I didn't know that accepting a stranger's coat and help would lead me to the love and family I had almost stopped believing in. Today, we make official what our hearts have known for months, that we belong together, with hope and whatever other children might join our family in the years to come. The storm that nearly took everything from me instead gave me everything I truly needed." She closed the journal, setting it carefully aside to be continued later. It was almost time. Rebecca checked her appearance one final time in the small mirror, her golden brown hair arranged simply with wildflowers woven through the braids. Her dress, a soft blue that complemented her eyes, borrowed from Mrs. Carleton but altered by Mabel's skillful hands to fit Rebecca's still slender figure. A knock at the door announced Judge Wilson, who had returned to Silver Creek especially for the ceremony. "Ready, Miss Frost?" he asked with a kind smile. "Your groom is getting rather impatient down there." Rebecca laughed, gathering Hope into her arms. "We're ready," she confirmed, her voice steady with certainty. The walk from the new house to the arbor was short but meaningful, a physical journey that paralleled the emotional one from her old life to her new one. Guests from the surrounding ranches and the town of Silver Creek rose as Rebecca approached. But she had eyes only for Xavier, waiting for her beneath the arbor. He wore a new black suit, his dark hair neatly trimmed, his face freshly shaved. But it was his expression that captured Rebecca's heart, anew, the look of a man watching his greatest dream walk toward him. When she reached him, Xavier's first action was to gently touch Hope's cheek, then to take Rebecca's free hand in his. "You're beautiful," he said simply. "Both of you." Judge Wilson conducted the ceremony with dignified efficiency, but Rebecca barely heard the familiar words. She was too absorbed in the reality of the moment that she, Rebecca Frost, who had once been abandoned and left to die in a Montana blizzard, was now surrounded by friends, holding her healthy daughter and marrying a man who loved them both without reservation. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the judge declared finally. "Xavier, you may kiss your bride." Xavier's kiss was gentle but thorough, drawing good-natured cheers from the assembled guests. When they parted, he kept one arm around Rebecca's waist, the other supporting Hope, presenting them to the community as a family for the first time. The celebration that followed was joyful but simple, reflecting the practical nature of frontier life. There was plenty of food, music provided by Hank and several other local musicians, and dancing that continued well into the evening. Throughout it all, Xavier remained close to Rebecca, their shared glances conveying the anticipation of the life they were beginning together. As twilight descended, Xavier led his new family back to their home. Hope, exhausted by the day's excitement, was already asleep in Rebecca's arms. They walked in comfortable silence, the first stars appearing in the deepening blue sky above them. At the threshold of their new house, Xavier paused. "Traditional to carry the bride across," he said with a smile, "but I think we've established we're not a traditional family." "No," Rebecca agreed, looking down at their sleeping daughter. "We're better than traditional." Together, they crossed the threshold, entering the home that would shelter their love and their family in the years to come. Xavier lit the lamps while Rebecca settled Hope in her cradle, both moving with the quiet efficiency of partners already attuned to each other's rhythms. When Hope was settled, Rebecca found Xavier standing by the window, looking out at the land that spread before them, land that would now be Hope's inheritance and legacy. "Happy?" he asked simply as Rebecca joined him. "Beyond anything I could have imagined," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "A year ago, I thought I knew what my life would be. I couldn't have been more wrong." Xavier's arms tightened around her. "Sometimes the wrong path leads to the right destination," he observed. If Marshall hadn't left you that night, if I hadn't found you in the storm. If you hadn't wrapped your coat around me and walked me home, Rebecca finished softly. Home, Xavier repeated, the word rich with meaning as he looked around the house they would share. That's what you are to me now, Rebecca, you and Hope. Wherever you are, that's my home. As they sealed this declaration with a kiss, Rebecca felt the final pieces of her heart's journey fall into place. The blizzard that had nearly claimed her life had instead delivered her to this moment, this man, this child, this love. What had begun as the darkest night of her life had led, through an unlikely path of loss and discovery, to the brightest of new beginnings. Outside, the Montana sky deepened to indigo, stars emerging like scattered diamonds across its vastness. Inside, in the warm lamplight of their new home, Xavier and Rebecca Carlton began the first night of their married life, surrounded by the love they had found in the most unexpected of circumstances, a love born in a blizzard, nurtured through adversity, and now blooming in the promise of all the seasons to come. Epilogue: 5 years later, the summer sun hung high over Double Crown Ranch, bathing the expanded property in golden light. From her vantage point on the porch, Rebecca Carlton watched her growing family with contented pride. 5-year-old Hope, her dark hair flying behind her, raced across the yard in pursuit of her 3-year-old brother James, whose chubby legs worked furiously to escape his sister's reaching hands. "I'm gonna get you, Jamie," Hope called, her voice carrying on the warm breeze. "No, catch me." Jamie squealed in delight, dodging behind the large oak tree that shaded the yard. Behind them both, Xavier walked carefully, their newest addition, 6-month-old Elizabeth cradled securely in one arm. His free hand occasionally reached out to steady Jamie when the toddler's enthusiasm threatened to overcome his balance. Rebecca smiled, one hand resting on her journal, the one Xavier had given her on their wedding day, now nearly full with 5 years of family history. She had faithfully recorded the milestones: Hope's first steps, taken toward Xavier's outstretched arms; James's birth during a spectacular thunderstorm; Elizabeth's arrival on a quiet winter morning. But she had also documented the ordinary moments that formed the tapestry of their life together: Xavier teaching Hope to ride her first pony, the expansion of the ranch operations, the community that had grown around them. Double Crown had prospered under their joint stewardship. Xavier's progressive ranching methods combined with Rebecca's financial acumen had transformed the operation into one of the most successful in the territory. They had added acreage, increased the herd, and built a reputation for fair dealing and quality stock. But more important than the material success was the home they had created, a place of love, security, and purpose, not just for their children but for others who had come to be part of their extended family. Mabel still presided over the main ranch house, though she now had help from 2 young women from town. Hank had married a widow from Silver Creek 3 years ago, and they lived in a comfortable cabin on the property. Even Judge Wilson had become a regular visitor, his judicial circuit bringing him to Silver Creek every few months, when he never failed to spend at least one night at Double Crown. "Mama, look," Hope called, breaking into Rebecca's reflections. "Papa's teaching Elizabeth about the clouds." Rebecca's attention returned to her husband and youngest daughter. Xavier had stretched out on the grass, Elizabeth propped on his chest, both looking up at the sky, while Hope and James collapsed beside them, momentarily exhausted from their game. Rebecca set aside her journal and joined her family on the grass, settling beside Xavier as Hope immediately crawled into her lap. "What are we learning about the clouds?" Rebecca asked, smoothing her daughter's wind-blown hair. "Papa says they tell us about the weather," Hope reported seriously. "And that one looks like a horse." She pointed enthusiastically at a vaguely equine-shaped cloud drifting overhead. "I see a dragon," James countered, his imagination always running toward the fantastical. "What do you see, Rebecca?" Xavier asked, his free arms slipping around her waist, Elizabeth gurgling happily on his chest, Rebecca leaned against her husband, surveying not just the clouds but the entirety of the life they had built together. "I see everything I ever wanted," she replied softly, for his ears alone. "Everything I never knew to dream of until you found me in that storm." Xavier's eyes, warm as they met hers, reflected the same gratitude and wonder that Rebecca felt each day. "Best night of my life," he murmured, "walking you home." Rebecca thought of the frightened, desperate woman she had been that night, how certain she had been that her life was ending, not beginning anew. She thought of Marshall, who had never met the daughter he had abandoned, and who, according to occasional reports, was still drifting from place to place on the West Coast, always searching for the next opportunity, the next illusion of prosperity. And then she looked at Xavier, at their children, at the home and life they had built together, and she felt nothing but gratitude for the storm that had stripped away everything false to reveal what was genuine and lasting. "Best night of mine, too," she agreed, bending to kiss him softly as their children giggled and Elizabeth waved her tiny fists in the air. Above them, the clouds continued their stately procession across the Montana sky, witnesses to the family whose story had begun in the harshest of winters but now flourished in the full, rich warmth of love's endless summer.